Grimm's Fairy Tales. The Two Wanderers. A wandering tailor was going from town to town looking for work when he met up with a shoemaker. The tailor was a happy-go-lucky person who took the world as it came. He was always willing to share whatever he had with his friends. The shoemaker, however, was bad-tempered and went about with a scowl on his face. He was convinced that everyone was always trying to cheat him. Despite these differences, the two decided to travel together. But when they got to a town, they separated, each going his separate way, looking for shoes to fix, and one clothes to mend. The tailor had such a merry air about him that everyone gave him work to do. The shoemaker, with his sour face, did not do as well. So when the two met again, the tailor's purse had more in it than the shoemaker's. The tailor shared what he had with his companion, and the two went on to the next town. One day they came to a great forest. Beyond the forest was the city where the king lived. Two roads led through the forest. One road took 7 days to cross, the other only 2. But the wanderers could not tell which was which. Before they entered the forest, they sat down under a tree to decide how much food to carry with them. "It's always better to take as much as one may need," said the shoemaker. "I will take enough bread for 7 days." "Why carry so much?" exclaimed the tailor, "when we have all the money we need to buy more once we are out of the forest? The bread will only get stale in a few days. Besides, I'm sure we'll choose the short road. I'll take bread for 2 days." So each bought as much bread as he thought necessary, and off they went along on one of the 2 roads. In the forest there wasn't a breath of air stirring, or a sunbeam shining on, or the song of a bird, or the babble of a brook. The shoemaker sweated as he walked, for his load of bread was heavy, but the tailor skipped merrily along, whistling and singing. By the morning of the 3rd day, however, they were not out of the forest. The tailor was not so merry, for he had eaten all his bread. On the 4th day, the shoemaker ate his lunch while the tailor watched. Unable to stand it any longer, the tailor asked the shoemaker for some bread. The shoemaker laughed and said, "You are always so merry. Now you know what it is to be sad," and he refused to give him any bread. By the 5th day, the tailor was so weak he could not walk. So the shoemaker said, "I will give you some bread, but in return I will take out your right eye." Not wishing to die of hunger, the tailor agreed. The shoemaker took out the tailor's right eye, and in return gave him bread to eat so he could go on. "Oh, well, I still have one good eye to see with," said the tailor to himself, trying to make the best of things. On the 6th day he was hungry again, and by the morning of the 7th he could not go on. "I will show you mercy," said the shoemaker, "and give you bread, but in return you must give me your left eye." "When I had enough money for both of us, I shared it with you," answered the tailor. "If you take my other eye, I won't be able to sew. I will become a beggar." The shoemaker was heartless, and he would not give the tailor any bread until he had taken out his remaining eye. Once that was done, the shoemaker put one end of the stick in the blind man's hand, and holding the other end, he led him on. That evening they came out of the forest into the field. The shoemaker led the tailor to the foot of a tree, and left him there while he went on. The poor tailor was so tired and hungry that he fell asleep at once. When he awoke the next morning, he heard 2 crows perching on the tree talking to each other. "Do you see the dew that has fallen during the night?" asked one crow. "I see it," said the second. "I will restore the sight of any man who is blind," said the first. "All a blind man has to do is wash his eyes in it, and he will see again." When the tailor heard this, he spread his handkerchief on the grass. When it was wet with dew, he wiped his eyes on it. His sight was restored at once. To make sure that he really could see, he took out some thread and passed it through the eye of a needle. When he realized that he could see as well as ever, he picked up his bundle and set out for the king's city. As he walked along, he saw a young mare running about in a pasture. Thinking that he could ride into town, the tailor caught the mare by its mane and was about to mount it when the mare said, "I am too young to anyone to ride. Let me run about until I get stronger. A time will come when I will repay you." "Go and run then," said the kind-hearted tailor, and he walked on towards the city. Soon the tailor felt hungry. He decided to catch and eat the first thing that came along. When he saw a stork walking across the field, he ran after it and caught it by one leg. "Hold still, Sir Stork," said the tailor, "for I intend to cut off your head and roast you." "Don't do that," begged the stork. "I bring good things to people, so no one ever harms me. Let me go, I will pay you in the future." "Off with you then," said the tailor, and the stork flew away. "Whatever I see next, I will eat," the tailor promised himself. Just then he saw a flock of young ducks swimming on a pond. Seizing one, he was about to wring its neck when its mother came up, swimming, quacking pitifully. "Spare my child," cried the mother duck. "How would your mother feel if someone was about to take your life? Take your child back," said the tailor, and he let the ducklings swim away. Then the tailor saw a hollow tree with a swarm of bees flying in and out. "There must be honey in that tree," he said, "just the thing for a hungry man." But as he approached, the queen bee flew out of the tree and said, "If you try to take our honey, we will attack you and leave you with 10,000 red-hot needles in your skin. Let us alone, and we will pay you in the future." And so the tailor went on, hungry but happy to have his eyes back. When he reached the city, he had some dinner at an inn and went out to find work. Since he was a very good tailor and had lost none of his good spirits, he soon became very popular. Everyone in the city had to have a coat made by the merry tailor. He became so famous that he was made court tailor to the king on the very day that the shoemaker was made court shoemaker. When the shoemaker saw the tailor and knew that his sight had been restored, the shoemaker thought, "I'd better get rid of him before he takes revenge on me." The shoemaker said to the king, "Your Majesty, this tailor has boasted that he can find the lost crown." "That would make me very happy," said the king. "Send him to me at once." The king ordered the tailor to find the lost crown, which had been missing for years, or leave the city forever. The tailor feared that he'd never find the crown, and though it had hurt him to leave a place where he had been so happy, he set out to find work elsewhere. When he came to a pond where he had stopped once before, he sat down to rest. The mother duck swam up and asked why he looked so sad. So the tailor told her the whole story. "The crown fell into the pond and is on the bottom," said the mother duck. "Spread your handkerchief on the grass and wait." Then she and her little ones dived down. In a few minutes they came up with the crown and swam with it to shore. The tailor placed the crown in his handkerchief, tied the four corners together, and carried it back to the king. The ruler was so pleased he hung a gold chain around the tailor's neck. Then the shoemaker went to the king and lied again. "This tailor says he can make a model of the palace in wax, showing everything in and around it." The king summoned the tailor, or ordered him to produce the wax model, or he would be in prison for life. Once more the tailor left the city, believing his task was hopeless. As he rested near the hollow tree, the queen bee flew out and asked what troubled him. He told her. "Go home," she said, "and come back in the morning with a large sheet." The tailor returned to the city, not noticing the bees who flew after him. Unseen by anyone, they flew into the palace and looked at everything. When they flew back to the hive and made a wax model of the palace and everything in and around it. When the tailor returned the next day, the model was ready. He wrapped it in a sheet and took it to the king. The king was so pleased he placed it in a special room and gave the tailor a beautiful house to live in. The next day the shoemaker told the king that the tailor said he could make a fountain of water gush out of the ground in the palace courtyard. The king ordered the tailor to produce such a fountain the very next day, or he would be banished from the city. Thinking that he would have to leave anyhow, the tailor once more set out to his wanderings. As he walked along, thinking sadly of all he had left behind, the young mare trotted up and asked why he had such a long face. When he explained, the mare said, "It is time for me to repay your kindness. I am now strong enough to carry you. Sit on my back and let's see what we can do." The tailor got upon the mare's back, and off she went at the gallop to the city. Like an arrow she went straight to the palace and into the courtyard. There she ran at full gallop around and around 3 times. At the end of the 3rd circle she stamped her 4 feet into the ground and reared up. With a noise like thunder, a piece of ground flew into the air high over the palace. Suddenly a fountain of water as tall as a man's head and clear as a crystal gushed up. The king threw his arms around the tailor in view of everyone, but the tailor's trials were not yet over. The wicked shoemaker knew that the king had 3 daughters, but he wanted desperately to have a son. So the shoemaker told the king, "That tailor, Majesty, says that he can bring you a son out of the air." The king said to the tailor, "Bring me a son within 9 days, and you can marry my oldest daughter, but if you fail, you will lose your head." Now the tailor was sure all was lost, so he again left the city. Presently he saw the stork walking toward him. "Why did you leave the city?" asked the stork. "You were doing so well." After the tailor explained, the stork said, "Go back home and say nothing to anyone. In 9 days I will meet you at the palace and solve your problem." The tailor returned to the city and stayed for 8 days in his house without seeing anyone. On the 9th day he entered the palace. Shortly after there was a knock at the window. When the tailor opened it, in flew the stork carrying a bundle in its beak. Walking up to the queen, the stork placed the bundle in her lap. When she opened it, there was a beautiful baby boy stretching out his arms to her. The queen was overjoyed, and so was the king. He called his oldest daughter to him and placed her hand in the tailor's. The two were married soon after, and the shoemaker had to make shoes in which the tailor danced at the wedding. This made the shoemaker so mad with rage and jealousy that he left the city. That night he laid down to sleep under a tree. When he woke up the next morning, he heard two crows talking about the dew that had fallen during the night. One said, "Whoever bathes his eyes in it will see a road that will lead him to treasure." The shoemaker quickly bathed his eyes in the dew. Almost immediately they began to itch and sting so badly he ran howling into the forest and was never heard from again. And that is the end of the two wanderers. And that is actually the end of the Grimm's fairy tale book that I have. So I will be starting a new book of stories, not fairy tales this time, but I will find something else. So I'm so glad that all of you joined me for this, and I'm sorry for any background noise. Sometimes it's just not preventable, but I'll see you all for the next one, and thank you all for listening, and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys for the next story. Have a fantastic day.